This episode was recorded before April 1st, 2022, when Danielle Smith announced her candidacy for the United Conservative Party of Alberta.
Welcome to Danielle Smith's Fraser Forum. This program is part of a series of podcasts doing in-depth interviews on free enterprise and personal liberty. I'm your host, Danielle Smith, president of the Alberta Enterprise Group. Go to fraserforum.org where you can subscribe, comment on the program, and see links to the studies we discuss. You will also find archives of previous episodes. Our email address is danielle@fraserforum.org. We'd love to hear from you.
Evolution has made us really complicated, but also interesting. And I think we're back to kind of libertarian perspective. This is where allowing for that lots of variation across humans is so important. So again, this sort of theology in economics is that your preferences are stable. Hell no, the neuroscience is completely opposite of that.
Hi there, it's Danielle Smith, and welcome to another edition of Danielle Smith's Fraser Forum. You have probably seen his very popular TED Talk from about a decade ago. Lots of work has been done in the meantime, but I'm excited to be talking today with Paul Zak. He's professor of graduate studies at Claremont University. Do I have that right? Professor at Claremont University, Claremont Graduate University, and his profession is the economics and neuroscience. And it's sort of an interesting way of us getting into a new topic because normally we talk straight about economics and empiricism, what you can measure. It's very logical and rational. But today we're going to talk a lot about emotions and how you have found a way to measure this, the response of individuals in society, measuring morality. It almost seems like it'd be impossible to do, but I'm delighted to talk to you a little bit about this. And I just want to get a sense of where you began. How did you get attracted to this field of study?
Great question. Thanks, Danielle. It's a pleasure to be on with you. You know, in economics, the sort of standard approach is called revealed preference. Have I observed you enough that I can intuit or figure out what your desires are? And if you ask people, again, there's this sort of theology in economics that you know your own preferences, but in fact, there's just copious evidence against that. So if people are so smart, why do they make poor decisions, right? And so that was kind of the entrance to bring in these transdisciplinary fields to help start neuroeconomics, neuromanagement, neuromarketing, was to really measure brain activity while people make decisions to understand not only if those decisions could be improved, but why people are making different decisions, where that variation comes from. And this really speaks to me to the libertarian philosophy, which is the average in neuroscience is swamped by the variation, right? The average is almost not meaningful. So where's that variation come from? It could be very simple things. You like chocolate ice cream, I like vanilla, or it could be really complex things like how we put people together in an office to work.
Can we talk a bit about the theory of moral sentiments? Because it's a work of Adam Smith's that I kind of put off to the side because I thought that's not really where the bread and butter of talking about free enterprise economics comes from. And yet, in watching what you've said in your video and in your writings, this is really foundational to how Adam Smith developed the Wealth of Nation and his theory of how economies worked. And I want to see if you can draw that connection for us so that I understand why it was so important for that to be the starting point.
Right. So Theory of Moral Sentiments was written about 15 years before The Wealth of Nations. At the time, it was just a huge success. It was really the first book to clearly lay out a system of morality that did not depend on a God influencing people's actions or, eternal retribution. And so Smith was a great observer of the humans, and it laid out a theory based on what Smith called fellow feeling, we would call empathy. So it's the claim in the Theory of Moral Sentiments is the reason that most of the time, most people don't hurt others, even strangers, is that if I have empathy, I will feel bad if I hurt you. I don't like pain. And we know a lot about the neuroscience of pain. I could talk about that, social pain. And so generally, we have this bias towards being nice to each other. So what it means from a policy perspective is I don't need a policeman at every corner. It also means a lot of, again, the kind of deep assumption is economics, that everyone is self-interested. It's all about me, and I'm going to take every advantage. In fact, I'm stupid if I don't take all the the money on the table. And yet what we see in human life is that lots of sharing, lots of cooperation, lots of deferment of gratification. Sometimes people taken advantage of, high degrees of trust. And just from a societal perspective, work, we've done in the last 25 years, high trust countries grow faster. They have higher standards of living. People are happier in those countries. They're objectively healthier. So these are the Norway, Sweden, Denmark. US is kind of in the middle. Canada is a little above the US. And so, this is really interesting, right? It says that we can live in decentralized societies because we have this internal mechanism that most of the time prevents us from hurting others. And then the work we've done in my lab really elucidated those key internal mechanisms in the brain that allow us to ask interesting questions like, when does it fail? What promotes appropriate social behaviors or moral behaviors? Where does criminality come from? Why are most criminals young males? Why do men after 30 almost never engage in criminal activity unless they have a history of that? These are really interesting questions that the science has really developed because there's a tool to ask about these mechanisms for the sense of empathy that keeps us embedded in community. And so just to finish that off, we're social creatures. Neuroanatomically, we are social creatures. Our brains are primed to engage with others. It's not unnatural for us to cooperate. Is exactly what we do. We are built for it. We evolved for it. We're good to go on cooperation. But I do want to cooperate with people that appear to be safe or trustworthy or cooperative. So we have to have something in our brains to live in Toronto or New York or Los Angeles that lets us know, oh, this person, Danielle, appears to be safe. I can interact with you. And your producer, Drew, clearly a sketchy woman. I've got to avoid her at all costs, right? So how do I do that? That's the only way I can actually live in big societies. So there was a mutation in the brain about 200,000 years ago. We could talk about that. But basically, we evolved to be hypersocial creatures. And Smith really nailed this without knowing the science.
I think I might be hung up on my paradigm from how I grew up. I call myself a lapsed Catholic, and yet the way you describe that is that Smith was developing a morality that was divorced from religion. So maybe we can just unbundle exactly what we're talking about, because when I think of morality, I think in terms of vice and virtue, but I also think in terms of social of harm to others. So when we're talking about morality in this context, I'm just going to put I wrote them down. The 7 deadly sins are pride, greed, lust, envy, gluttony, wrath, sloth. And then when you talk about the crimes that you might commit against somebody, so harming another person, those are more harms to yourself, harms to another person, or you don't want to cheat or lie or steal, don't want to covet your neighbor's stuff, you don't want to murder. What realm are we talking about? Is it both? Is it vice, or is it the harms that you might cause somebody else?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the way we study this in the laboratory, us and other people, is first of all behaviorally. So there's no top down. So you can map the 7 deadly sins into behaviors that are asocial, right? They don't keep you embedded in community. And again, as social creatures, we need to be embedded in community. So if I engage in any of those 7 deadly sins, I will be ostracized from my community. I'm not a cooperator. I'm not a key member. And if you're ostracized, you die if you're a social creature, right? Hermits are extremely rare, and most people who isolate themselves die young. So loneliness is really a problem. Poor mental health, poor physical health. So you don't want to be isolated. So we work very hard to sustain ourselves in community, and avoiding those 7 deadly sins mean that we are pro-social. So I'm investing in relationships. Again, this gets back to Adam Smith and also my work, right? Which is that investment has great value, has a cost, get time in, and you might take advantage of me or hurt me. But again, we have this thing in our head that lets me discriminate between a person who's likely safe and likely unsafe. So this can be taken advantage of by psychopaths, by con men, right, in which you can play the role of being a trustworthy person and then harm somebody. And so again, I've worked on the science of that as well. So that's also interesting. But for most of us, if you smile at me and you're friendly, and my brain goes, oh, yeah, Danielle, she's fine, she's cool, so I will cooperate with her unless I get a signal that I shouldn't. And these signals are unconscious. And so we've done many experiments where we have asked people to evaluate others, And, like, oh, this person seems fine. But your brain, unconscious parts of your brain will know that, right? So we ran a study very recently, published in last month, in which we had a very high stakes share the money task, $530 on the line. People could talk beforehand. We measured about a dozen neurologic signals. And everyone said, what are you going to do? I'm going to cooperate. I'm going to cooperate. So it's going to be great. So no one said, no, I'm screwing you over. Like, social creatures just don't do that, number one. Number two, about 30% of the people actually did screw over their collaborators. So they made decisions in private. They made them sequentially. And those who did, even though they were chatting, like, I'm going to cooperate, their brain signaled that they were going to cheat. So they had this big stress response. They know it's not the right thing to do, but there's a lot of cash on the table. And interestingly, those people who did cheat their partners were measurably less happy. They felt bad about it, right? So that's something that psychopaths don't get. And I spent a lot of time studying psychopaths. So again, we're back to Adam Smith. We have this mechanism that goes, what's the right thing? Cooperate. And then second, if you do cheat, then you have this negative feedback loop that says, oh, you did something wrong. So there's evidence that social pain lasts longer, twice as long as physical pain, right? So our brains are training us to avoid these bad behaviors, these asocial behaviors. We could call them amoral behaviors, to keep us embedded in community, because that's how we survive and flourish.
Can you go back and talk about what happened 200,000 years ago and why we developed that? Because I remember reading recently that one thing you would never see in, say, among chimpanzees is two chimpanzees would never cooperate to carry a log, which I thought was a really interesting way of differentiating how that spin-off branch went in a different direction than we did. But I don't know if I know why. Why is it that
Great
that we
question.
developed that mutation?
Yeah, in fact, it's worse than that. Two chimpanzees from different troops will see each other. They will have a battle to the death, right? So humans will do that, but rarely. We often will find, oh, hey, you live in Canada, I live in the US. Oh, yeah, we should hang out or do a deal or whatever. Like, we have the mechanism for that chimpanzees don't, even though we share 99% of our genes with them. So this mutation about 200,000 years ago was associated with a hallmark of mammals, which is live birth and care for offspring. And that is associated with a number of factors, but primary among these, I can't talk, is this neurochemical oxytocin. So all of a sudden, 200,000 years ago, some Homo sapiens got a lot more oxytocin receptors in the front of their brain, and that created a network in which they were more sensitive to social information. They were better at reading the people around them. And what that led to was conglomeration around 10,000 years ago, when this mutation had spread into civilizations, where now I can live and work in societies that are not kin-based. So we got to grow. And once we have growing, then you have specialization of labor. And now you have the generation of surplus. So all of a sudden now, we're not depending on hunting and gathering. We have people who are specialized in particular tasks. We have trade. And how do I not get cheated? Memory and talking, right? So we have long memories. So Bob, the fisherman, I give him some of my, doodles on my paper to give him fish. He screws me over. Now I'm going to have a real lively conversation with the rest of my civilizations. Do not trade with Bob. You should avoid him at all costs. And maybe we'll punch him a couple times in the face, right? So there's this enforcement mechanism. So anyway, that's basically the base of it. So now we all have this mutation. We're all super sensitive, with a couple exceptions, to social information. Those exceptions include people with autism, severe autism in particular, and, as I mentioned earlier, criminal psychopaths. So we've shown that psychopaths lack this system for empathy, for understanding the emotions of others. And so if you don't have the Adam Smith fellow feeling, it's easy to hurt someone if you don't feel bad about it, right? So psychopaths never have pets. Psychopaths don't have dogs, right? If you have a dog, you have to care for that dog. That dog needs you to survive. So for listeners, if you see someone walking down the street with a dog, that person is likely going to be trustworthy, right? If the dog's healthy, right? Because you have to care for the creature, and you got to, put some effort into it. You have to put some emotion in it. It's hard to have a dog and not attach to it, right?
Totally. I've got two of them, so people know when they see me, I'm safe. Can you go back to oxytocin then? Because every time I see that, I wonder if there's a relationship with oxycontin and oxycodone. Are they totally different things?
All right. So oxytocin is a neurochemical made in the brainstem. So it's very evolutionarily old. Its lineage goes back to fish at least 400 million years. So it's a deep part of our human nature. And it's a chemical that increases our ability to understand the emotions of others. And work from our lab shows it does some additional things. It motivates me to cooperate with others. I'll work on your behalf. Oh, that's interesting. So now I have a mechanism in my brain that voluntarily motivates me to be a cooperative person, even if it means I spend some resources on that. Number two, it reduces the physiologic stress that we have from being around other people. So again, if we're living around strangers, which most of us do, then that balance between vigilance, so that you might hurt me or you might not be safe, and wanting to interact with and cooperate with you, oxytocin pushes us towards the cooperation side. And then lastly, oxytocin activates a larger circuit in the brain that makes it feel good to be good. And this is really interesting. So now when I open the door for you, Danielle, and you thank me, my brain gives me a little boost of another neurochemical called dopamine. It goes, keep doing that. That was nice. That person liked it. And so we learn as children, we learn very quickly, if I'm punching that guy in the, in the play yard, people are not going to be like me. They're going to avoid me. Okay, that's not good. But if I'm nice to people, my brain goes, oh yeah, guess what? The humans like this. If you want to interact with these humans, then you've got to spend some effort to integrate yourself, to invest in relationships.
So you mentioned that it was a mutation that began through childbirth, and it sounds, but it's not. It's not just a female neurochemical, even though it's strongly connected with childbirth and breastfeeding. So can you explain the difference between men and women with this particular chemical?
Yeah, great question. So again, this classically oxytocin is associated with birth and breastfeeding and sex, three activities that are much too messy to run in my lab. So what I'm talking about is oxytocin in the brain. So it's a very ancient chemical. So it's actually made and released in the brain. And so it's working as called a neuromodulator, or like a neurotransmitter. So it's sending signals in the brain, or affecting how signals are sent in the brain. So in the brain, it's influencing behaviors. It's not the binding to the uterus that's affecting those behaviors. It's the impact in the brain. And so when we look at the gender differences, at first we're like, oh, come on, everyone's making this. But actually we found now in 20 years of experiments that literally for every experiment we run, women release more oxytocin when they are trusted, when they are shown a kindness, than do men. And they're subsequently more generous, more empathic. They're much nicer than men are. So now you know why women are nicer than men, except, Danielle, I hate to blow the bubble here, or burst the bubble, but other factors as women cycle through their month. Estrogen increases the activity of oxytocin. Progesterone, which is the hormone of pregnancy and ovulation, decreases it. So women are nicer than men on average, but also they're more variable. So you're a complete mystery to us, which is nice. And on the male side, one of the primary inhibitors of this empathy, moral behavior, oxytocin effect is testosterone. So if we think of the least empathic people on the planet, young males, right? So I used to be one of those. And I got into a bit of trouble, and because in experiments we've done where we give men synthetic testosterone, they become overconfident, absolutely selfish, less cooperative, on and on and on. They make much poorer decisions, financial decisions, social decisions. So these are the 15 to 25-year-old boys. They're more impulsive. They think, God's gift to the world. So again, evolutionarily, it makes sense. If your testosterone is high, you're on top of the social hierarchy. You are a little mini God, and so you should be. Your brain tricks you into thinking that you are God's gift to the world, or to women, or whatever. So again, I'm not saying I'm making a value judgment here. I'm just talking about the underlying biology of this. But for women as well, if a woman gets a raise and becomes CEO or president her testosterone will go up, right? So will a man's. You win a chess match, your testosterone goes up, and you become just a little bit of a jerk.
What happens then at age 30? You said that it drops off, and you're so right, because you look at crime statistics, and I've watched those over the years, and that's one of the reasons why we've had a falling crime rate decade after decade on average, is because once we hit that baby boom surge and we had fewer children being born, we just had fewer of that target age group that would commit crime. So I've seen that before, but I don't know why it drops off after 30.
Right. So testosterone in males begins to fall from age 30 onward.
Hmm.
And therefore, that impulsivity, that overconfidence, the crazy driving, all those behaviors we see in males, risk taking, begins to decline. And so crime is quite risky, right? You go to jail, you can get killed. And so that risk taking reduces. And look how beautiful evolution is. If you're in a committed relationship, your testosterone falls. If you have children, your testosterone falls. And I only have evidence for myself on this, but if you have girl children, you pick out little dresses every day, you become a girly man, your testosterone goes to zero. And even though I'm 6'4", 200 pounds, I'm the sweetest guy you ever met, unless you're going to steal my kids, and then I have to kill you. But
so
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 we have these mechanisms.
I totally get then on the testosterone side, but does it also work the same in men then? As you're saying, over 30, your testosterone's falling, but you're having those interactions with your wife, with your kids. Does that also increase the oxytocin as well?
Right. So this is balancing, right? So as the testosterone falls, there's a greater opportunity to release oxytocin. You're exactly right. So now I'm a better nurturer. I'm a better spouse. Isn't it crazy? So I don't know how women put up with men under 30 years old, but again, if men are doing highly competitive activities, women too, but men, again, the men have 5 to 10 times the testosterone as women. So the scale is just much bigger for men. If you're a soldier, if you're a firefighter, if you're doing, your testosterone's up. It's got to be up because a professional athlete, because that's how you survive in this profession. Now you may have already started with high testosterone, but it's being bumped all the time to help you perform at your best. And then it has a reasonably long half-life, so it just stays in your system. So politicians having affairs, completely predicted from the neuroscience. Athletes, beating up their wives, sadly, completely predicted because they're sort of testosterone poisoned. Again, so I'm not saying this is right or wrong. I'm just saying it's predicted by the science.
You've created a conundrum for me though, because you would think that because oxytocin is so important, that attachment is so important, yet at the same time, you've also mentioned that women do tend to be attracted to those hard charging guys who are at the top of their game and who don't seem to have the same level of empathy. How do you solve that conundrum for me?
Yeah. So, work out of University of New Mexico about 20 years ago showed that um, when women are ovulating, they are strongly attracted to high testosterone males. You see them long jaw, long fingers, muscular, all the signs, deep voice, basically me. No. And so I'm old. I don't care anymore. But when they're not ovulating, they actually prefer lower testosterone males who are more likely to maintain a relationship with them, spend time with
Mm.
children. And so, again, evolution has made us really complicated, but also interesting. And I think we're back to kind of libertarian perspective. This is where allowing for that lots of variation across humans is so important. So again, this sort of theology and economics is that your preferences are stable. Hell no, the neuroscience is completely opposite of that. Your brain at millisecond frequency is helping you adapt to your environment. And again, there's some underlying genetic factors and
Mm.
developmental factors from childhood. But basically, we're a very adaptive creature. And so I wouldn't want to do the same thing over and over and over. That's not adaptive. So as I have children, as I get older, as I don't know, go to jail once for a crime, if I'm, have half a notion of IQ and not too much testosterone, I'm like, oh, that was a bad idea. Yeah, society said, we don't like this behavior, so we're going to isolate you, a social creature, from the other social creatures. Try that out for a while, see how that feels. And so for the human brain, social isolation is processed just like pain, and so it generates a craving to be around the other people, which again can diminish that desire to engage in these violent, risk-taking, impulsive behaviors.
I want to explore that more with you, but connect one more thing with me since we started with Adam Smith's theory of moral sentiments. Connect this again to his most famous line, of course, from The Wealth of Nations, that it's not through the benevolence of the brewer, the butcher, or breaker that we come to expect our dinner, but rather the regard of each to their own self-interest, I think is what it is. And so that is another thing that strikes me, is that a lot of the most successful CEOs do have that kind of hard charging, high testosterone, get out of my way, not the most empathic necessarily if you read some of the biographies or autobiographies of some of these guys. And what is that connection there? Why is it that you do have that some of the people that we rely on to create the businesses and the entrepreneurship and take the risks to allow us to advance in the economy, why does it seem that they have a deficiency on this side?
Right. Great question. And I think I only have a partial answer. I mean, part of that's genetic. So people who are hard charging or energetic. So again, we do drug studies. We do studies with synthetic testosterone. I have this funny moral behavior, which is any drug study we do, I take the drug beforehand, even though we have ethics approval. So I can say to participants, look, I took this drug for 2 weeks. It didn't change my life. It should be safe for you. And there's a medical screening. So yeah, testosterone, gosh, it's the wonder drug. So
Uh,
less need for sleep, greater workouts, high energy. Let's say my wife was tired for those 2 weeks a lot. So, it's perfect. It's the best thing ever. But increased risk of heart attack, increased risk of diabetes, increases risk of violence. I mean, there's downsides too, right? So again, you have people who genetically probably have high testosterone, then they're being lauded socially, which increases their testosterone. They are winners. So I worked with, I guess I can say it now, I worked with AIG and their turnaround back after the 2008 recession. Right? Remember, they kind of crashed. It was the largest bailout in US history. And I remember being in a conference room with the C-suite, and these were the alpha males and females. I mean, the women were 6 feet tall. I'm 6'4". The men were like 6'7", 6'8". I'm like, these people are freaking crazy testosterone monsters, right? So, these are the captains of industry. But who's going to do this job unless you can just get by on 3 hours of sleep and have super energy? And I don't want that job. That just sounds awful to me. So again, you have to kind of be built for this, but also you're being reinforced as well. I do think that even Jack Welch, who the former CEO of GE, who just passed away, realized that this is not an effective long-term strategy for individuals or for organizations. He said before he died, Management 2.0 is all about trust, and trust means devolving power, responsibility down to individuals. It doesn't mean top-down hierarchy, which he wasn't in favor of. So now we're kind of back to this kind of policy implications, which is we're seeing in my 2017 book, Trust Factor, that organizations that have less hierarchy, that enable individuals with autonomy and trust are more profitable. Employees are more satisfied with their jobs. Employees take fewer sick days. They're not being beat up at work and diminishing the function of their immune system. And so we're understanding that we're social creatures, but we also don't want to be micromanaged, because that removes my individual initiative, my discretionary effort, is the term of art in business, towards creating value for the organization, and me also getting the satisfaction of creating that value.
You have we've opened a can of worms. I don't know if we're going to go down this track though, but there's so much work being done on why it is we have women attracted to certain professions and men attracted to certain professions, and why there's inequality. And I think what we're talking about here may form the basis for understanding why some of that is. Because if you're attracted to a certain career in your early days, it's going to be heavily influenced by these factors, it sounds to me.
Certainly. I mean, a lot of the male-dominated professions are muscle professions, right? They're construction. They're things that women they can do, but they're just not biologically as good as men on average. But you look at finance, banking, women are taking over. Those are intellectual. There's no reason for muscle in that. I think there are also lifestyle issues. Again, you have this, women are bear the burden and maybe the benefit of having children, and so if you're running GE and you're never home, it's great. A.G. Lafley, who ran Procter and Gamble for many years, I know a little bit. And when he retired, he unretired. He retired and unretired, and then he ran the company again. But anyway, between his first and second retirement, I saw him and I said, "What are you looking forward to doing?" And he said, "Being home, eating my own food, and just working out." He's a runner, and so like imagine, he said, "Yeah, I'm on the road 300 days a year." Like, oh, how do you have children? How do you have a life? But people do it. Meg Whitman, who was the CEO that grew PayPal and eBay, and then later ran HP. She has children. Her husband's a neurosurgeon, right? So I mean, somehow they work it out, right? So it's possible for women. I think it's just slightly harder, and I do think we should. My personal view, not informed by science, is that we should respect all those personal opinions. We shouldn't force an equal number of women and male CEOs. If women don't want to do this job, or as many women don't want to do it, I mean, there's a pre-COVID, there was a labor shortage almost around the world. Canada, US, Western Europe, Mexico has had a labor shortage pre-COVID, and it's only gotten worse. And so there's no shortage of jobs for women, for sure. It's, as you said, it's kind of slotting where you feel like you can get the most benefit and also have that work-life balance.
Well, let's talk more about the experiment, because I'm not sure I fully understand how it works. I need you to walk me through it so that I can do a self-assessment of how I think I might behave under those circumstances. Keep in mind, I am the type of person that if someone gives me the wrong change, give me too much money, or if they haven't put something on my bill, I always try to correct it. So that's sort of my predisposition. So I'm thinking I would do well on your experiment. But for those who are interested in how you've really measured what this trust aspect is, 'cause that's the interesting part, that you found a way to do some laboratory work and test how a person responds in a social environment. So I want you to walk us through the experiment so I can make sure I understand it. How did you set it up?
Sure. So we actually copied the behavioral task from Vernon Smith, Nobel Prize winner economics, big libertarian, and was very kind, mentored me for many years. And so this task basically is a sequential share the money task, in which one person is full information, but you're making private decisions. So you can send money by computer to another person. If you do, it comes out of your account, but it grows in the other person's account. So again,
Do I know the person? So you're giving me how much money? $100?
Let's give you $100, and then you're fully instructed. You know you're going to be matched just randomly to somebody by computer, and you can take any of that $100 out and ship it to some other person that you're matched to, but you can't see them or talk to them, and you only do this one time, so there's no effects of reputation. And so anybody.
But you're saying it multiplies in their account. So if I give them the entire $100, they're going to get what, $200 instead?
It multiplies by 3 to make it fun. Which is typical. So you give up the full 100. They know that, and it becomes 300 in their account. Wow. And they get $100 too. So you both start out with $100. You're both completely equal. And then the computer says, "Hey, person one sent you $300." We remind them in total of their account. So now you have $400. Do you want to send some amount back to that first person? And whatever you send back comes out of your account 1-to-1. It's not multiplied again. So let's say I send you back 200 of that 400. We both leave the lab with 200. You made 100% return.
Huh. So the smart move would be just trusting that everybody's going to do that, because if everybody transferred money, it would triple, and we would all be better off, right? That would be what you would think people would do.
Yeah, or keep all the money. So the prediction from classical economics is, once person 2 has that money, I call this caveman economics. Me like money, money good, me keep, right? But what the classical economists have missed is that there's a social component there, right? So it's not that you were sent money. I mean, if we send it by computer, people just keep it, because we say a computer's going to send you some money, you can send some back to the computer. Sometimes people do, which is sort of weird, because I think they anthropomorphize the computer making a decision. But it's that a human sacrifice to make you better off. So what we showed was that the more money you receive, which is a signal of trust as the second decision maker, the more your brain produces oxytocin. And the more your brain produces oxytocin, the more money you return. So I think of oxytocin as kind of melting that self-other divide. We come in, there's a bunch of people, they're all seated at computer stations. I can kind of scan the room and figure out that these are probably people sort of like me. Anyway, so it, now it's like, oh, I'm sharing money with my brother or sister, which I would do, right? As opposed to strangers, which is interesting. So it turns out that even if you break up groups, and work we published very recently, if I give you a red badge or a blue badge, or have you wear a uniform, or it's like we had soldiers march in uniform around our lab, and that causes their brain to make oxytocin, and they had a red badge, and they were matched by computer, someone with a blue badge, and it says, hey, you're matched to a blue person. So the standard view is that I always want to benefit my own in-group. But in fact, if your brain makes oxytocin, the system is so blunt that now you're just sharing money equally with people in your in-group and out-group. So oxytocin, again, really melts that self-other divide. It's like, we're all here together. Let's just hang out. Where absent that oxytocin release, it's like, oh, I'm a red and you're a red. Yeah, we should take care of each other. Even if that group is just randomly formed, again, we're unconsciously, we're trying to figure out, how do I survive this weird little situation these experimenters have put me in? So anyway, it works, pretty much around the world, although there's a cultural overlay. So if you're in like small scale societies that are like lone hunters, they don't have developed the mechanism for sharing. So they tend not to share because they just survive on their own.
But it isn't 100% in the lab, right? So it sounds like different levels of oxytocin cause you to retransfer a larger amount of money, but there would be some who don't transfer at all because there's no oxytocin that is released. Is that what you described, and how significant is that?
Oh, such a good question. First of all, I'm going to go backwards. So you said causation. So when we measure oxytocin in blood, we're looking at, we don't know for sure causation. So we've done studies where we infuse synthetic oxytocin safely into people's brains, which has been about 700 times now. And we can actually cause you to send more money, right? We can actually induce this effect physiologically, so which is really cool. Why don't people get this oxytocin effect? One could be genes. It's a small number of people, individuals who, again, have personalities that generate psychopathologies, individuals who have been abused and neglected or abandoned. We've studied in some detail, and they tend not to have an intact system because they just weren't nurtured when they were growing up. So their brain's not going to waste this valuable real estate for something that they just aren't able to do. It's like dropping you into France and go, well, speak French now. Well, you've never been trained, right? So your brain's just, you can maybe get trained up for a while, but you can't be dropped in there. High levels of stress inhibit oxytocin release. And so we sort of know that intuitively. When you're super stressed out, you're not your best self, you're cranky, and you're not nice to other people because you're just trying to get through the next 10 minutes. High levels of testosterone. And so there's a bunch of factors that we've identified that inhibit this response. And again, we know that causally because we do studies where we administer synthetic testosterone or we administer a drug that makes your physiologic stress go up. And so
what I find interesting about the exercise is, I guess I figured that you needed to have a personal relationship with somebody in order to feel that kind of connection. And I'm wanting to bridge to this because I'm still not sure how I should be assessing social media now, especially in this post-COVID era, where so much of our interactions, I should mention, I'm in a non-free jurisdiction. I know you're in a free jurisdiction. We've had varying degrees of extreme lockdown over the past 2 years, including vax mandates, people getting fired from their job for not being vaccinated, not being able to leave our country if you're not vaccinated, not being able to go to a restaurant, having to wear masks everywhere we go. So I think we're coming from different contexts. I think I'm still feeling a bit emotionally damaged by that. I want people to know what context you're coming from so that we can kind of see what sort of damage we might have caused to each other over this last 2-year period. But you're in a more free jurisdiction, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes. So I lost the thread of your question now.
Well, first, I just wanted you to describe where you are so that people know that we've had different contexts, because it's going to be weird because everybody has had a different experience these last 2 years. And so you're in California, a county, which I thought California was in a terrible state, but your county was not.
Yeah, I'm in a kind of mostly a rural county. So we've been no mask for a year, and everyone wants to be vaccinated. There's no cards, there's no whatever. So travel, everything's good. I'm so sorry, Canada, but God bless.
I know. Tell me about it. Yeah, really. I mean, at least we're now beginning to see some of those restrictions lifted. We're not 100% of the way there yet, but I think that there's been this perception on the part of policymakers that we can be isolated and it won't matter. We don't need to see people's faces and it won't matter. We can interact over Zoom and it won't matter. We can follow what's happening on Twitter and social media and it won't matter. And yet I'm beginning to feel, having had this conversation, that it matters a great deal that we haven't had that social interaction over the last 2 years. I just want to get your take on it.
Yeah, so let's go through the science. So first of all, you made a supposition which is reasonable but wrong, which is from the oxytocin, this connection molecule, attachment molecule, would be a larger response for people I have a relationship with. And in fact, it's the opposite. It's a larger response because it's signaling safety for a stranger, right?
Really?
So the brain is very stingy on using resources. So it's more efficient metabolically for me to use memory that you're a person who's safe. So I've been married 25 years. I see my wife. I don't need to release oxytocin because I have the memory that she's only trying to murder me twice and she's probably going to be safe today. So right? So I don't need oxytocin to tell me that. But I see a stranger, I now have a bunch of competing signals, and they're kind of balancing safe or unsafe. So the response is actually bigger for strangers. Isn't that interesting?
It is.
Yeah. And again, you can hack it. It's actually high for dogs. For dogs, it actually declines less. Dogs are perfect, right? Let's just be clear. So okay, so that's the first thing is we have a need for that. As I said earlier, when we're lonely, we have this craving for that kind of interaction. We can get some of that from this 2D world that you and I are in now, Danielle, but we can't get as much. We don't have as much bandwidth. I'm not getting smell, which is a very powerful signal for connection. I'm not getting touch. I'm not getting as much body language. And so we have done studies where we've looked at not only oxytocin, but a neurologic state I've called immersion, where I'm attentive to the experience and I value it. So immersion is like social value. How much value do I get from this experience? And that varies between 80 and 50% on 2D, video conference versus in person. So it's half or three quarters as good. So it's not bad. Your brain still wants this. This is like people crying in movies. Not me, Danielle, because obviously I'm super macho, but I've heard that people occasionally cry at the end of movies. That's neurologically very interesting, right? You're so immersed in that movie, it's as if you are having that experience. So we can have an amazing experience in the 2D world for sure, but it's much more powerful in person. And so if we want people to be effective colleagues at work, if we want to sustain relationships, and if we want to learn better, we actually need to be more immersed. So this neurologic state immersion strongly correlates positively with information recall, for example, from a meeting or from a classroom weeks later. So again, the brain is valuing that experience more if I'm more immersed in it, and that's easier in person. We can still do this. It's just a different experience from the brain perspective. And we don't know, sorry for such a long answer, but we don't know if young people who are kind of digital natives, if it's different for very young people versus older people.
Let me
Change
let
that.
me ask if this would be an experiment worth doing. So what you said is that it's important as a bit of a shorthand for how we should interact with strangers, which I guess leaves me worried about young people over the last 2 years who were just beginning to figure out some of how society works. If you're not able to see people's faces and you're isolated, are we going to end up with any kind of long-term problems in having those kids able to read signals and understand how to interact with strangers? That'd be the thing that I'd be worried about and looking towards. Or is this just so embedded in our genetic history from 200,000 years that those kids will be able to snap back with some resilience? Is that something that would be worth testing and seeing?
Yeah, I mean, I think it'd be, if anything, only short term. As you said, this is deep in the old parts, evolutionary old parts of the brain. So again, we'll get that social relationship any way we can. Here's a quick example that I'll just do with you. If I just show you this, what is that? Well, gosh, I don't know if you can see it, but most people see that as a face. It's just 3 lines, right? So we anthropomorphize everything. So if there's any human interaction, again, a movie, I've cried at advertisements like, oh, the dog died, and so yeah, we're just primed for it. We're so essential. But again, we're back to Adam Smith, and we're back to freedom of choice. We're going to, again, from the science, we're going to expect lots of variation. People have good days and bad days. People have different genetics, and so we see lots of variation in appropriate social behaviors, if you will, moral behaviors. And in you yourself will have a lot of variation. So people should not beat themselves up if they're, having a bad day and crying. I mean, apologize to people around you for sure. Be a good human. But everyone's gonna, you're not even gonna know. Your brain swims in about 200 chemicals. We don't know, right? So all of a sudden, I'm just cranky to my wife, and I got to go the next day. I'm like, man, I was such a jerk yesterday. I was having a bad day, and I think I took it out on you. And if you know someone well enough, you go, yeah, you were such a jerk yesterday. So yeah, thanks for recognizing it.
You know what? You're going to have to help me process this a little bit too, because I joined Twitter in 2009 and I left Twitter in 2020. And I joined Twitter in 2009 because I liked the idea of community and being connected, and you got things shared and liked, and there was a bit of an exchange. It was all this world of strangers. And then it seemed to have gotten dominated by Russian and Chinese bots, and you don't even know who's real and who's not. And there's anonymous trolls, and it became a really hostile place to be. And yet people maintain an obsession, I think an unhealthy obsession with something that trends on Twitter, or whether they're trending on Twitter, or how many likes they got. I've talked to people who got beat up on Twitter, and it just tortures them for days or weeks. And so I'm trying to process whether social media is a net positive or net negative to society. It seems like it should be able to give us a lot of this social connection you're talking about, because that would be where your oxycodone would be released, but or oxytocin would be released. But it does also seem like there's a very strong danger of ostracism, which, as you'd mentioned, we have an outsized reaction to from an emotional point of view. So you've watched the development of social media and our interaction to it. How does that fit into your work?
Yeah, I think there's a real desire for connection, almost as much as we can get. But there are connections that are negative. There are people in our lives who are not healthy for us to be around, sometimes in our own families. So I think the same thing on social media. I think that that need for connection is being fulfilled with social media. But if it's negative, it's not healthy for you, if it stresses you out, you should do less or stop. And so I think it's kind of building your friends. I think one of the kind
Mm.
of brilliant ideas of Facebook originally was you would invite people to be friends of yours. And I think after a while you just say yes, 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 yes. But you could sort of curate that. Where on Twitter, anyone can follow you, right? So you don't have the right to. I guess you can block them, but you don't have the right to say no. So I would say a little bit probably is okay, but obsessive amounts. Go meet your neighbors. Go go meet real humans. Go to a bar. Well, once you can do that.
Well, talk to me a little more about ostracism, so I understand the how we process being excluded from the group, because it seems to me that the governments have used that to great power by creating the group of vaxxed versus unvaxxed. And some of the dialogue and language, you might not be seeing it in your county, but in places where we have had that social division and the restrictions, it's actually been used as a bit of a weapon to have one group seem to be on the inside and the other on the outside, and genuine ostracism, not allowing people to participate in social activities. And I don't know if the politicians making these kinds of decisions realize what kind of emotional and psychological harm that's causing to a person. But the fact that you said that ostracism is harder, that social exclusion is harder to get over than a physical pain, it stuck with me. And I'm wondering if you can help us understand why that is.
Yeah, it's a great question. Social exclusion is not only painful; it actually activates the pain matrix in the brain,
Mm.
but it also is physiologically stressful. So now I'm just more anxious. I'm just more on edge. So I want to be included in something. So again, that inclusion could come from social media, could come online, but even not seeing smiles, it's difficult, right? So if we look at where people focus, we look at the eyes and the mouth. Most of us, that's where the emotions are coming from. So if I'm knocking that out, I'm only getting half of that information to see if you're happy or sad and how I interact with you. So we really need the social interaction. So again, I think we have to balance that with the need for safety. But if you want to diminish or put in fear, I mean, uh, not to go too far into politics, but yeah, just keep pushing out every day how dangerous COVID is, and well, whatever, or whatever boogeyman we're talking about, and then you go, oh gosh, I can't do that. Like you said it, I think before we started recording, Danielle, that in the early stages of COVID, there was so much uncertainty. We just didn't know. It was so stressful. And, you weren't sure who to interact with, and you had to wear a mask outdoors, and it was so scary. And now we know a lot about this disease. Everyone who wants a vaccine has gotten it. So what I found in, like, when all the stores are closed in my neighborhood, I have a dog. I started walking my dog 2 and 3 times a day, because I was like the only exercise before. I built a little home gym, you know, but people would come talk to me, like, with a social distance, right? I mean, maybe a mask, or like they just needed contact, like real in-person contact. And outdoors, again, I'm a safe person because I got a healthy dog. So yeah, surprisingly, and again, I'm 6'4", I'm a big guy, and I'd had 20-year-old women come on over, like, oh, can I see your dog? Hey, how are you? And we just, like, I met all my neighbors. So I think there's a real need for that.
Interesting. So we might see an upside now that the restrictions are easing. You might find that more people want to have more interaction, and there could be a lot of positive that comes out of that. Thanks for raising that. I want to ask you one other question though, because I've been very influenced by Ayn Rand over the years, and you talk about libertarianism. And one of the things that I'm wondering what Rand would think of our conversation here, because I tend to think of her as completely suppressing the emotional side, all about logic and reason and making choices so that you can have a life path that leads to your objectives. She's actually quite hostile to the notion of altruism, that really you've got to put yourself first and make your decisions around yourself first, because only by being your best self, I suppose, can you achieve what you want in life. And yet that seems to go counter to our biology. So I'm wondering how you would fit that kind of rigid, individualistic, me first, libertarian selfishness into the paradigm we've been talking about.
Yeah, even Adam Smith in his two great books differentiated clearly between self-interest and selfishness. So selfishness, in most theological, philosophical traditions, is antisocial. It's about putting
Mhm.
me first. Now, there is a sense from Ayn Rand that, the plane's going down, put on your air mask first, your oxygen mask first, because you can't help anybody else if you're out. But I think there's no best self. If we look at kind of the work I've been doing the last 5, 7 years on satisfaction with life, where does that come from? Primarily, it comes from social relationships.
Mm.
Health matters. People who are religious are a bit happier. Having enough income certainly matters. But the big factor is the value of social relationships. And that's, to me, that's an investment. So even if you're the most selfish, uh, Rand objectivist kind of person, you want to invest in social relationships because it's so embedded in our biology. So as an example, some years ago, I turned 50 and I had 4 surprise birthday parties. And I'm a super nerdy introvert, could spend 12 hours in the lab not talking to anybody. But I did this research. I go, oh, holy smokes, I got to actually get better at what I'm doing. So I started investing in those relationships.
Mm.
And I think I'm a better person because of it. I certainly have a lot more friends and have a lot more opportunities to do cool stuff because I know people. So I'm kind of torn. I mean, you've got to make sure that you are doing the things that you need, but it's much less about stuff and more about activities and people.
Well, it is interesting you should say that, because one of the things I've been surprised by is the number of people who seem to be contented with not having the same kind of office environment and social environment and interaction that we had pre-COVID. And I wonder if it goes back to whether you're introverted or extroverted. Did you use that as a factor when you were looking at people's responses in any of your tests? Do introverts and extroverts respond differently?
And again, one would think extroverts are just warmer people. No, but we do find that people by personality who are more agreeable release more oxytocin, and people who are more empathic, not surprisingly, release more oxytocin. So these are the feelers. They're warm. They have a lot of friends. By the way, their lives are much happier long term. So, I'm not naturally a super emotional, feely person, but I've worked very hard to do it. So, again, for listeners, you can get better at building social relationships. There's very good evidence that if you invest in that, then again, it's an investment to me. It's an investment in greater satisfaction, in having a rich social life, and not just getting more stuff. I mean, we know more stuff just doesn't make you happier long term or more satisfied.
I guess that's the question, is why does the theory matter in the first place? What is it that understanding how human beings interact, why doesn't matter? Is it to make us more productive citizens so that we can generate more, or have more productive companies so that we can sell more, or have happier workplaces so we can attract more workers? How does this tie into how the sort of the major ways in which we structure our lives, our relationships, and most importantly, our business relationships?
What a great question. Yeah, was thinking of this. He was a socialist, Carlyle, who called economics the dismal science. It's the happy science. It's really about how do you curate your life for greater happiness, and that's the bulk of my professional work has been creating knowledge and technologies to help people curate their lives for greater happiness. So we know from research in my lab and others that employees who have more autonomy are more satisfied with their jobs. They put in more effort and they get the satisfaction from that. So it's really not that acute happiness, some little spike. It's about long-term satisfaction. So when you work hard for something that matters, and that's social purpose almost always. So Peter Drucker, one of my colleagues who's now passed away, said, at its core, every organization's purpose is to improve people's lives. So embracing that, all business is about servicing people to help them get better at something. Give them stuff they need, give them a service they need, And you can pay for that. Doesn't mean it's not a moral good if you're paying for it. But when employees understand that what they're doing is important and they're doing with people they can depend on and that they can then respond, when they've done something hard, they have that satisfaction. So that's important. That's why work is important, not just to be a member of society and be productive, but to get that internal satisfaction. I did something important and useful. Then secondly, outside of work, really those rich social relationships. So people are more satisfied with their lives when they're married, when they have good relationships with family members, when they have more friends. And so to me, you could be the most selfish person possible, but understanding biology is telling us how to get the most bang for the buck, how to hack these brain systems to really live satisfied lives. And the punchline of that is service to others.
Hmm. You've put two things in conflict for me. As you were talking, I was thinking of an article that I read recently about workplace meetings, and that there are literally some workplaces where they're spending upwards of 50 to 75% of their time in meetings. And one of the things you just said there about happiness in the workplace is having autonomy. I hate meetings. I mean, I got downgraded in my internship at an oil company because I was not seen to be a team player, because I just didn't want to go to meetings. I wanted to do real work. And so there's a bit of a tension there, isn't there? Is that you've got to socialize or be in a social environment in a workplace, but taking collective action doesn't necessarily mean sitting in meetings all day. It means working to a collective goal, but you can do that autonomously. And so I'm trying to, these two conceptions seem to be in conflict. And I'm wondering if you can sort that out for me.
Yeah, they do. I don't think I have the perfect answer on this, but at least in the experiments we've run and the ones I'm aware of from other labs, are that people are actually more effective when they're physically together. They can certainly coordinate through video conference or Slack or email or whatever, but there's something that unexpectedly happens when we're just together because it's not scheduled, right? If we're in the same physical building. And that also plays into what we've talked about, kind of emotional wellness. They're just, as a social creature, I need to be around humans. And so, you just need that time. And it could be on video conference or whatever, but you kind of need that feedback. I need to be around them. I'm just going to be a better human. So I'm going to feel better about myself. I'll have reduced stress levels. So we showed in a study at a pre-COVID in a very large company in the Midwestern United States that individuals who worked in divisions of this company in which trust was very high, not only put more effort to work, objectively produced more output, but they shed the stress of work faster. So I think it's incumbent on the workplaces, as we're decentralizing more and more, which I'm for, to also create physical and emotional spaces so that the office is kind of a social emotional hub. I want to go in because that's where cool things are happening. Maybe I don't have to go every day, but I want those unexpected interactions, bumping into people. Oh, you're working on that? I heard about that too. Or maybe just, did you see that new movie? Or what, do you see this thing on Netflix? Right? That's actually really valuable from a brain perspective. And when I have that immersive experience, whether it's around work or not, it means I have this kind of supercharged interaction in my brain. We're like, okay, I'm in. Now, whatever I'm doing, recreating or working is going to be just more effective. So think about, doing a sport. I don't know, I used to play basketball by yourself. It's a lot more fun with other humans, right? Even if I'm losing, I'm still just having fun because it's just a interesting interaction.
It's interesting to hear you say that you like the decentralized workplace, because I think we're now in a position of tension where you've got employers who want people back in the office, but you've got employees saying, "Hey, I'm perfectly productive at home. Why can't I stay working at home?" I think even in Silicon Valley, they've realized a lot of those tech jobs don't need to take place in the office. People are moving to lower cost jurisdictions, and the bosses are saying, "Fine, you want to move out of this area and it costs less money, we're going to cut your pay as well." So I'm trying to figure out how the workplace is going to change based on the ways in which we've learned that we can work differently. It's been quite a shakeup. I don't know that anybody would have ever thought we could have done as much work from home as we've been able to accomplish over the last 2 years. And it sounds like you've got a conception of it that could be quite balanced, where there's a portion of the work that you do at home, but then there's a reason for why you'd want to go into the office and collaborate. Do you think that those kind of workplaces are going to develop? Do you think that there's enough flexibility?
I think so. I mean, this was happening pre-COVID, and COVID just accelerated it. So we saw, a lot of large companies shedding real estate,
Mm.
doing hot desking, right? So you have a shared space, you're working at home, you're working on the road. It saves a lot of resources and also reduces that commute time. I mean, the downside is, having not having that clear barrier between work and social life. So I don't think there's really work-life balance. I think there's work-life integration. So a lot of people prefer working at night, or they work early in the morning, and that just, the 8 to 5 doesn't fit their chronotype. And so why should we force people to not do what's best for them, or they have children, or they whatever, they want to do something else. And so I think, having that flexibility is good for the individual employee, but also good for the organization and good for society. So as I mentioned earlier, individuals who work in high trust workplaces are, objectively healthier and happier. Don't we want that? Isn't that the goal of every organized society, civilization, to create happy, healthy individuals? Having said that, again, I think we still want some interaction. So I think, as social creatures, we still follow leaders. So if your boss is in the office 5 days a week, yeah, people are going to start showing up, right? They're like, oh, Bob's in the office. I bet, he's there. So I think, you can do it. But, simple things. We talked about hacking the brain. Have pizza and beer on Friday at 5 o'clock. So a lot of the return to work businesses I've been working with, they see a lot of people coming in Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday,
Mm.
for good reason. I'm like, great, do a Friday pizza happy hour. Serve lunch like they do at Google, these long picnic tables, and just make it from 12 to 12:30. So you got to get in there and interact with everybody else. So even if you're in your cubicle or whatever, you got to interact with others. So I think you can structure work so that people are sort of incentivized to spend more time in the office. But if you really don't want to, you don't have to.
Do you think that we're going to have, I mean, a lot of the work that you're doing is around trust and trustworthiness. And I'm worried we've lost a lot of trust in most of our institutions over the last 2 years. That do we trust our politicians, or have we gotten tribal into particular political parties? Do we trust our mainstream media, or are we all now going out and finding things on alternative media? Do we trust our hospital system and our medical doctors to, because we kept getting different and competing advice, and I'm just wondering how that would ultimately play out, because trust seems to be pretty essential in our human interactions, and I'm worried that we're in the middle of a major trust deficit, and I don't know if you've done any work that can talk about how that trust, how to improve that level of trust.
Yeah, so what we've seen in most developed countries, certainly North America, Canada, US, Mexico, much, although not all of Western Europe, is decline in trust levels from the late 60s. And part of that, I think, was just, the openness of the media to begin to show the warts of politicians. So what we're seeing in the data are less trust in federal governments, but fairly good trust at the local level. And I think that's also a good thing,
Hmm.
right? So I understand the local level. I maybe know this person. I've heard the name. Where Trudeau, Biden. What the hell do I know about these people, really? Right? I just know what the news tells me. So I'm a little skeptical of the world's ending because we don't trust each other. I think it shows that people are thinking critically. Even the people that want to get vaccinated. I think, well, good for you. You want to roll the dice? That's fine. But at least you're using your brain, and you're just not following. You're not a sheeple, as they say. You're not just doing what everyone else is doing. So again, I think it's an individual choice. I think we should we should allow people to have the freedom of choice. Otherwise, you're living in a dictatorship, right? That's not good for anybody. But it does require some level of trust to go through society. So in the U.S., we've had a spike in crime because of reduction in police forces, and I think just pent up unhappiness of being at home for 2 years. And so obviously, if I can't walk the streets and feel comfortable, how do I build relationships with strangers? How do I get that oxytocin benefit? So there's a level of kind of stability of the social world that we need in order to have the neural resources to actually engage with others.
I love your optimism. I'm sure that once we've gotten to the same point of freedom that you have over the next year and a half, I won't feel as gloomy about the future as I do right now. But one of the things that I find so interesting in how you're talking is you talk about the importance of decentralization and the importance of the individual, and yet it strikes me that we're in a direct conflict with those who believe that you should put the collective first, that if the collective wants you to do X, Y, or Z, then you're a bad person. Like it goes back to the social acceptance. You're a bad person if you don't follow what the collective wants you to do. You will be ostracized if you don't want the collective to do it. So it seems like we've moved away from the importance of the individual and moved away from that decentralized decision making. And those seem to be pretty big global tensions that are rubbing up against each other. Do we have more and more decisions made further and further away and putting the collective good ahead of the individual? Or is there some reason why we should want to see more decentralized decision making and more individualism? I mean, that's where I am personally from a philosophical point of view. But I wonder if societally we're there. And maybe in our sort of last few minutes here, if you could just make a bit of the pitch about that competing worldview and why it is you think decentralization and individualism is the direction that we should be going for human flourishment.
Great. Again, such a deep question. So I'll try to be brief. What we're seeing in for-profit businesses is a decentralization. We've been seeing this for quite a long time, at least the last decade and a half, in which we're empowering individual employees to make decisions, to have autonomy. This works in a high trust environment. And at the same time, as you said, at the kind of political level, country level, we're seeing a great reduction in trust. So I think in this case, businesses are leading where we want to go. As you said, employees can kind of work anywhere if they can, once they can be hybrid workers. And so this movement towards greater freedom, at least in the US data, seems to be really taking off. I was in for a couple of months in Denmark this last fall. We have an appointment, and I was living in Denmark, totally free place, no masks, no vax cards, But then different countries in Europe, you couldn't even get in without a PCR test. So, but Denmark's great; they're fine, and one of the happiest countries in the world, also a very high trust country. So people pretty much do the right things in Denmark, which is pretty amazing. So as long as that people can self-regulate, which is easier in smaller societies, that I don't think we need the top-down control. Having said that, we are social creatures. We're embedded in social environments. And so sometimes we do have to do what we may not want to do for the collective good so that we all can get along. I don't want to stop at stoplights every time I drive in my little neighborhood, but I do because it's the right thing to do. And God forbid there should be some kid I don't see or something, right? So, you have to take some hits. So I don't know where that trade-off is, but I do think it's a good thing that people are skeptical and they're pushing back. Friedrich Hayek said, 50 years ago, if you look at every crisis in history as an opportunity for federal governments to grab more power. And so I do think we as individuals have to fight back, and maybe from a policy perspective, and say, no, I don't think in the US there's any constitutional right for the government to tell me I can't go to work or I have to put a mask on my face or even to get a vaccine. I think there's no right at all. It's not in our Constitution. So, but we've allowed it because it seems like it's probably the right thing to do. But I think we have to push back now and go, no, just not going to do it anymore. So there's some fighting that we have to do, right, for individual liberty. And I think if we're not willing to fight, then it just erodes down because governments want to see control. And at least I don't know about Canada, but in the US, there are a ton of federal agencies that were set up in the 30s and 40s that should be blown up. We don't need them anymore. There's a lot of corporate welfare. Just get rid of them. Right? But does that happen? No, for lots of reasons that you guys all know.
I have to wonder if you look at different economic indicators based on the kind of work that you do. I don't know if there are measures of, they've often talked about how we need to have measures of happiness as opposed to measures of GDP. And I wonder if there's any advice that you would give on that. Are we measuring the wrong things, or should we be measuring something else?
It's a great question. So, happiness and wealth actually run together positively, right? So, you just have more opportunities to do stuff. So, there's work by Danny Kahneman, Nobel Prize winner economics psychologist. So if you look at acute happiness, it tends to peak out when you get about $75,000, $80,000 a year. But if you actually look at satisfaction with life, that just increases linearly, right? So you're just more satisfied when you have higher incomes. And so when you have higher incomes, you can accumulate wealth and then you have opportunities. It reduces the stress to think, I can get through this no matter what it is. So as decentralized, low regulation, low tax countries grow a lot faster. And so by having those opportunities, you're able to allow more people to get the benefits both of the economy, but also of the general satisfaction. And satisfaction increases your health span, lifespan, reduces
Mm.
morbidity and mortality. And so, yeah, I think we should be in the satisfaction business. So again, happiness is this acute response, but satisfaction is kind of the adding up of all those extraordinary experiences. So we want extraordinary experiences. We want amazing experiences. And the more we can get them, the more satisfied we are with our lives. And by the way, when you're more satisfied, again, your stress is lower. You're just
Mhm.
a nicer person to be around. You're not so stressed out and cranky.
And we'll probably have a longer life with less stress. I
Yeah.
wanted to ask you because when I was watching your presentation, which I think has almost got 2 million views from the TED Talk you did years ago, I was thinking, I don't know that I'd want to be enrolled in your study because I hate needles, and you had to do a lot of needles, pricking people before and after to be able to get that window where you could measure the oxytocin. But you told me that your research has changed quite a bit now, and just give me an idea of how you're approaching the work that you do, and give us an idea of the kind of things that you're measuring now.
Yeah. So we're actually measuring kind of gestalt brain activity. So less on, so the oxytocin work was really looking for a lever to explain, if you will, good behavior that really hadn't been there. So bad behavior is so easy to study. If I do that, I can measure heart rate. It's just a piece of cake. I can make, but like you said, they get, understanding and measuring that good behavior, trust, generosity, charity, that's the stuff we did for a long time. But that's only part of the picture. Oxytocin is just part. So now we're measuring very high frequency electrical signals from the nervous system. And then 4 years ago, I launched a software company to commercialize and make available these findings, which we can pull data from a smartwatch and apply algorithms in the cloud so that people can actually see for themselves how much they value an experience. And again, the more extraordinary experiences you have, the more they add up and the quality of life is higher for those individuals. So applications in simple stuff like marketing and entertainment, but also things like online education and K to for K to 12 students, corporate training, we call this emotional wellness. So really having an amazing experience while you're shopping, at the movies. So here's the interesting little data point. I live outside Los Angeles. For the last 30 years, 80% of Hollywood movies have lost money. How
Hmm.
is that possible that for 10,000 years of storytelling, at least, humans do not know a good story from a bad story? Right? I think it's because this creative endeavor is hard, and the creator himself or herself, the director, and all these people kind of think, well, if I like it, everyone else will like it. But actually, that's a very self-focused view, and the whole discussion we've had is about being other-focused and the value of being an other-focused creature. And so, having a technology like, how much do people value this movie that I'm creating? That just gets rid of waste because I'm super cheap dude and I hate to see wasted money and time, but also creates a better experience for the customers of that, the moviegoers. So yeah, let's develop more technologies to allow people to curate their lives for greater happiness.
And I kind of like that ability. I notice that whenever I get shown an advertisement, because I'm into the Google products, so I use the Gmail. I allow them to track what I search. But you know what? I get really good ads, and most of the ads that come my way are things that I'm interested in. But some people are very concerned about that level of intrusion into their privacy. That you just went and searched online for a home gym, and all of a sudden you're getting ads for home gyms. Is there any downside of that, or do you just see upside to that?
Yeah, no, there's some downsides. I mean, for us, we're not collecting any personally identifiable information, but if you mine the heck out of this, yeah,
Mhm.
sure. So I think as social creatures, we have a primary goal, which is to persuade the other people around us to do stuff. So that's what we do. I'm trying to be nice to you. You're trying to be nice to me. I don't want to be cranky. I don't want to be a bad person. Right. So that's just what we normally do. I don't have to be trained to do that, hopefully. So, if I'm going to create an experience for you, if I am other regarding, if I want to make it great for you, I've actually got to have a technology or some way because people can't tell us. If people would tell us the movie was bad in the screeners, then, we would never have bad movies. Right. But people actually don't know because, again, we're asking you to report your unconscious emotional experience.
Mm.
So kind of back to your earlier question about Ayn Rand, and it's not just cognitive. I think where libertarians sometimes fail is like it's totally rational. Like if you want to take drugs, you should take drugs. Yeah, except that drugs have a lock-in period, right? Some people get really addicted and their lives are ruined. So I think by having technologies that are kind of neural prosthetics, It allows us to begin to say, oh, here's what I want to spend my time. Here's what I really enjoy doing. It also empowers individuals to know their own selves. So so we have clients using our technology to help employees perform better. Well, that sounds evil. That sounds terrible, exploitative. But it actually puts the power in the hands of the employees to say, hey, I measured my immersion at work the last 3 months, and I love client meetings, and I'm terrible at accounting. I mean, I'm not terrible. I can do accounting, but my brain just doesn't like it. So give me more client meetings. And Susan, she loves accounting. Give her more accounting.
Oh.
So now I've learned about myself. So I think it's part of this quantified self movement. And what's more important than finding out what your brain loves, because you don't always know.
Well, I have a suspicion if we talk 5 years from now, we're going to have an entirely different conversation because this field sounds like it's moving very quickly, and you're at the forefront of it. You have a book coming out, correct?
I do have a book coming out called Immersion, The Science of Extraordinary Experiences, out summer 2022. And it will talk about applications of this technology, what we've learned about how to help people curate their lives for greater happiness. There's a chapter on persuasion, and the last chapter is called Happiness. So to me, again, all this social science, all the work I've done and many people have done, and I think the work of the Fraser Institute, all this is about happiness. How do we help people be their best selves, have the opportunity to really flourish? And for people interested in that, I think go to the Fraser website for sure. Tons of great stuff there, and hopefully read some good books as well.
Well, and your book is perfectly timed because we're certainly all needing a dose of happiness after the last couple of years. Thank you so much for the work you do and for the conversation today.
It was so much fun. Thank you.
Thank you. That is Paul Zak. He's a professor of Claremont Graduate University, and his area of expertise is economy and neuroscience. I'm Danielle Smith. This has been Danielle Smith's Fraser Forum. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you like what you heard, be sure to subscribe on YouTube and wherever you stream your podcasts. And to stream old episodes, learn more about the show, and where to subscribe and submit your questions for future guests, visit fraserforum.org.